Let's discuss Introduction to Algorithms and Integer Arithmetic. Arithmetic has two different types of pronunciations. As a noun, it's pronounced arithmetic to describe addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. As an adjective, it's pronounced arithmetic. Addition, composed of addend plus addend equals summation, subtraction, minuend minus subtrahend equals difference, multiplication, multiplicand times multiplier equals product, or factor times factor equals product, and division, divisor divided by dividend equals quotient. With these forms of arithmetic in mind, we can move on to something called order of operations, also known as PEMDAS. It consists of parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. It goes from the most dense mathematic groups all the way down to the simplest. So parentheses, we do whatever inside the parentheses first. Exponents, when we have 2 to the exponent of 3, it's really saying multiply 2 3 times. So 2 times 2 times 2. Multiplication is repeated addition. So 3 times 2 is really 3 plus 3. Division is the inverse of multiplication. Addition, just adding two numbers. And subtraction is the inverse of addition. Multiplication does not always come before division, and addition does not always come before subtraction. That is a common point of confusion. If we have negative 40 divided by 4 times 5, the division comes first here because it's to the left. Field axioms. It's kind of like building a house. If you have the bricks, you start with the foundations and you work your way upwards to build a house. Likewise with math, this is the absolute basics that we need to cover before we move on to other topics. Commutative law. It's basically saying that order doesn't matter. We could have A plus B, and that will also equal B plus A. A times B also equals B times A. Associative law. Grouping doesn't matter. A plus B plus C equals A plus C plus B. We can switch around the order. Same with multiplication. A times B times C equals C times B times A. Then we have the identity law. A plus 0 equals A. It retains its identity. 0 is the identity because A is not changing. We're still having A. Same with multiplication. A times 1 equals A. We're still left with A because any number times 1 will equal itself. Then we have the inverse law. The inverse of addition is subtraction. A plus or minus A equals 0 because we're subtracting the A. Likewise with multiplication, A times 1 divided by A equals A. Distributive law. It's basically multiplication over addition. We could have two baskets. The first could be full of X number of apples, and the second could be full of 2 number of apples. When we distribute across, we do 2 times X and 2 times 2, and we get 2x plus 4. To close it off, we're going to close it off with the closure law. The closure law states that when you add 2 real numbers or multiply 2 real numbers, you will always get a real number. You will never get an irrational number. So 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. The system is closed. What do I mean by closed? In other words, on your smartphone, if you try to download an app from the App Store, you can never download a Windows PC program from the App Store because it is outside of the closed system. Sometimes the closure law fails. For example, if we state that when we add 2 odd numbers, they must always equal an odd number, look what happens when we add 3 plus 5. We get 8, and that's an even number. So the sum of the odd numbers breaks under the closure law for the given statement that we just said. And to end off, we're going to end off with algebra. What's the difference between algebra and arithmetic? I think scientist Richard Feynman explained it best. Algebra is just a series of steps by which you could get the answer if you didn't know what you were trying to do. Take the following equation. 2x plus 5 equals 10. You're not thinking about doing the processes while you're solving the equation. Likewise in basketball, you're not thinking about the force of the air pressure on the ball. You're just focused on the structure of the game. I'm just focusing on solving the variable of the unknown, which is x. That is what is introduced in algebra. In arithmetic, we're just dealing with whole numbers, integers, real numbers, while in algebra, we're forced to solve the equation balanced on both sides and finding the unknown variable x. And then we apply it back to our equation. X equals 2.5. Okay, 2.5 what? Apples, cars? It could be anything, right? We could use algebra to solve for linear equations later on in y equals mx plus b. We will get to that later. Or we could even use it to solve the trajectory of how far a ball travels. And those are called quadratic equations, which I'll show you in a future video. But let's summarize it on the introduction to algorithms and integer arithmetic. With arithmetic, order of operations, field axioms, commutative law, associative law, identity law, inverse law, distributive law, closure law, and algebra.